have a really embarrassing confession to make. I still play Neopets. This game was a staple of my childhood, and I have a pretty difficult time letting things go, so every so often I'll check in and read the forums or participate in the events and just make sure that my account hasn't been hacked. Which means I've seen pretty much every single incident and scandal that this site has ever had, all the way from the Scientology cult accusations of the early 2000s to the very recent short-lived NFT drama to the even more recent accusations of someone allegedly using a collection of 30,000 bots to snipe every single expensive item on the site so that one person can control the entire economy. Allegedly. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Because this video isn't about any of those scandals, even if they all contributed to why the site is currently floundering. This video is about something that, in theory, should have been a good thing. And when it was announced, I was actually pretty hyped for it. I started checking the site every day in the build-up to prepare as much as I could, and to get myself back into the habit of using Neopets daily again. You see, Neopets actually got pretty close to shutting down again about a year ago. This was when it was bought out by Dominic Law, who was the chief metaverse officer of the company that previously owned Neopets called NetDragon. So now they made their own independent company called World of Neopia, and they've gone on record as saying as they want to bring out a new, modern Neopets renaissance, most of which involved making the site mobile friendly and planning to release a standalone mobile app. Which I can't say has really gone as planned so far. Neopets is now a website that has half the pages done in a vaguely modern mobile-friendly style and half in the same old ancient Web 2.0 style that it's been in since like 2009. Which means it's inconvenient to use on both mobile and desktop. But still, I could ignore all of that. I was so hyped and I was so excited for what they announced that I was willing to put up with a lot of scuff in hopes that they were bringing back a part of the site that I'd always looked forward to as a kid and even into my late teens. And that was a massive site-wide event called a plot. You might be surprised to hear this, but for a silly little pet site, Neopets lore actually goes pretty deep.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine.
Back in the day, Neopets used to run events called plots every couple of years or so, and these puzzles were no joke. In the plots I personally participated in, solving the puzzles was incredibly intense and involved. Sometimes involving steps like requiring each individual person to solve their own randomly generated version of the puzzle that often required the player to do a variety of activities, including, but not limited to, following and keeping track of very complicated patterns, navigating correct routes through a randomly generated maze, calculating complex math equations, and remembering very detailed instructions to carry out at a later point in time. Not to mention, these puzzles were hidden around the site kind of like an ARG, which means alternate reality game, and is typically a story told through various puzzles and hidden website links, and similarly like hidden little pieces for people to discover as they go through the story on their own. Kind of like a digital escape room. For example, one major part of the Lost Desert plot was an area of the site called the Temple of 1,000 Souls, which players discovered existed through an ad at the top of a few different pages of the site. It wasn't announced, it wasn't something that players could really prepare for, it was organically discovered, and the continued steps were even further hidden in the puzzle, so the player base at the time had to work together to try and figure it out. It was a clever use of ad space, which was kind of a new concept at the time, so most people didn't have like ad blockers or anything yet. It was a more innocent time. This made the game pretty similar to those like analog horror ARGs that are all the rage across YouTube now, but like on a virtual pet website where you could actually earn in-game points and items from solving the ciphers and the puzzles. So when they announced a huge new plot called The Void Within, as someone who still likes to check in on my Neopets every now and then, I was both excited and wary. Part of the fun of Neopets plots was figuring everything out organically through the site itself, rather than having some kind of like main hub or some kind of handheld guide. But sure, I understand. Most people use adblock now, so obviously the original sneaky way that Neopets introduced the Temple of 1,000 Souls wasn't a viable option. And more importantly, they needed to use this plot to try and give the site a little bit of life support. So they needed to hype it up and advertise it to draw traffic back to the site. It got me to check back in, didn't it? So, despite my somewhat bad feeling, I was willing to give this new team the benefit of a doubt and see what they could come up with. From what I saw, they seemed pretty dedicated to trying to bring Neopets back to its glory days, and nothing fires up the internet hive like a potential ARG. I was tentatively pretty excited for it, and ready to get right in on the ground floor. The Void Within started on July 17th, 2024. It was announced early on that this plot would be running for the next 10 months or so we already kind of knew that they were going to roll out the content very, very slowly. For reference, most prior Neopets plots were finished in about 2 to 3 months. And yes, it did bother me slightly that we knew the exact pace of the plot rather than getting to figure it out as it went, but I could still look past it. I was also prepared for them to make this plot accessible to people with, quote, busy lives, unquote. So when the big opening of this plot was a reveal of a generalized hub link location and a singular comic page, I was still willing to wait and see what they had up their sleeves. For continued comparison, while previous Neopets plots also had a little bit of a slow start, we typically got entire chapters of comics at once, and there was usually some initial activity to do or something to interact with that teased future puzzles or minigames. For example, in the aforementioned Lost Desert plot, at the bottom of the first comic there was a little link that said, "Psst." And if you clicked on it, you would get to go view a tablet that would feature prominently in the activities to come. The community even began to look into scrolls that showed up mysteriously in the news, that players were told to look out for, and figured we'd eventually need to start collecting the scrolls through various hidden events across the site. And that was only the first day of the plot release. Other plots were similar, with the Tale of Woe's first day involving a comic, as well as a whole point-and-click adventure and puzzle to solve that involved reading certain things in a specific order. And there's also the Outdoor plot, started off with a similar point-and-click adventure without hand-holding the player and telling them exactly where to go. This hub page gave us absolutely nothing. Nothing but dread. Oh, but it gave us the prize page in advance. The prize page set the community off immediately. Within this prize shop were very, very expensive and sought-after items from 20 years ago that the hoarders have been spiking in price after, allegedly, stealing as many as they could from hacked accounts. People on the only active Neo board, that is, the dreaded Board 7, or the Site Events board, immediately started fighting and arguing about it, because that's basically the only thing you can do on Neopets now. Get into arguments with strangers on the internet over a 24-year-old virtual bet game. But the prize shop really set people into a frenzy, because it made a lot of high-value and highly sought-after items a lot easier to obtain for casual players. And there were a few arguments that people made about this. One was that the items were expensive and difficult to get for a reason, because there's really not much else to do on the site anymore but try to save up Neopoints to buy expensive items. And with inflation, yes, even Neopets suffers from inflation, and how easy it is to get Neopoints now, some of these items cost upwards of 200 million Neopoints before they were re-released. The average casual player who only checks in on the site every couple of months probably isn't ever gonna see that amount of Neopoints, let alone use it to buy a single item. But for people who have been consistently and actively playing this game for 20 years, it's not out of the question. So it became a war between the neo-casuals and the neo-elite about if the new Neopets team was casualizing the game by making these hard-to-get items much more within reach for the majority of players. I've personally never been dedicated to earning a ton of Neopoints, and I think inflating some items to hundreds of millions of Neopoints is ridiculous, but it does feel a little bit like if everyone has the Wand of the Dark Fairy, then no one has the Wand of the Dark Fairy. You know what I mean? However, the prize shop really annoys me because it made everyone obsess over min-maxing plot points and the prize shop itself instead of the actual content of the plot. For most other plots, speculation on what would happen next and digging into the code ARG style to try and find the next steps early was what the community was buzzing about after the plot started, not some dumb obsession over if it was fair and balanced or not, and how to min-max to get the most amount of points possible with the least amount of effort. But don't worry, surely people are gonna start talking about the plot soon, right? The early release of the prize shop was my first red flag. It's just a prize shop though, right? In the end, it doesn't matter, and it really shouldn't affect anything. It's annoying that people are gonna obsess over plot points now, especially since with previous plots, we've never been able to see how many points we earned or the prize shop until the plot was completely over, which was probably better for the collective sanity of the site. But it's fine, because the new Neopets team has promised tons of difficult puzzles and battles, just like the plots of old. Let's first take a minute to go over these older Neopets plots that I've mentioned and the ridiculous levels of complicated ARG that was built around them. Jelly Neo has a really good archive for all of the site's previous plots and their various puzzle solutions that I'm going to briefly mention here. So if you want a more detailed read through of what these plots consisted of in a way that probably makes a lot more sense than how I'm going to describe them, the links to each plot guide will be in the description below. So, remember the Temple of 1,000 Tombs that I mentioned earlier? Well, the first thing you had to do for the Lost Desert plot was to figure out how to navigate a maze that was completely randomized for each account, to try and find a pattern specific to you and your tablet. You had to find a door that looks like this. After that, you'd have to go on a hunt through the site following different clues. And once you did that and you had a completed tablet, you'd have to go over to the comics to find interactive symbols hidden within the comics and click on them in the order they appeared on your specific tablet. And the order was different for everyone, so it was a little bit more involved than just clicking the links in a specified order. And then you would know which door to find to get the hidden statue, which will have one of 12 symbols on it, which will then direct you to which answer you need to give to a bunch of temple guards after a scroll repository is unearthed nearby. And then there was a time-limited multiplayer game where you and 4 other players would move a block and roll a d100 to see which of you won the prize that was under the block. Sometimes players could win really expensive and high-value items, like the Lost Desert paintbrush, but I'm cursed with bad luck, so I never won anything good. Eventually, after a few other time-limited events, you would find a crystal that you would place into a miniature replica of the Lost Desert area that would then reflect primary colors onto the wall, which would correspond to the symbols of your table, that you would then have to go back and decipher and then go through the scroll repository to read the scrolls in your specific order, generated by your specific tablet and your specific colors. This would then repeat 2 more times with a couple different patterns, one of which made you have to guess, where it was mathematically possible, if you were really unlucky, that you'd have to track down and read 35 scrolls on early 2000s snail-paced internet. That's the condensed version too. There was a lot that went on with the Lost Desert plot that was very cleverly hidden around the site at the time, and the player base worked together to figure out most of the puzzles and create guides for the players to solve in their own specific tablets. You couldn't just cheat and click some links or copy someone's answer and call it a day. You had to actually put in the effort and make your own spreadsheets and maps if you were serious about solving the interactive elements of this plot. And not to mention, while all this was happening, there was a huge dramatic story playing out in the comics that related to each step of the plot, but didn't overshadow what the characters were doing. The second plot I'll roughly cover is called The Tale of Woe. The story was much more closely related to the puzzles this time, with the player taking over the role of Gilly, a Neopet, who discovers a mysterious locket, and in the process of trying to find the owner, manages to fall into a spooky ghost town hidden out of time. As Gilly, you navigated through a point-and-click maze that required you to find and place items in a specific order on the map in order to trap the monster that chased you in there. Then you had to go through another maze puzzle with a randomly generated map for each user that required you to solve the classic one of us always tells the truth and one of us always lies puzzle, and then also required you to hunt around the site to go play one of the games to get an item that would let you through part of the maze where the final puzzle was. And none of that was told to the player either. The fact that you had to leave the maze in order to go to another area of the site to get an item from it was something figured out by the players using context clues within the puzzle itself. Following along with its predecessor, The Tale of Woe also had a few different time-limited events. There was grave digging, where you had your Neopet dig up a grave for bones in a fun rhythm game, and then you tested the bones trying to find a specific spirit. To test a bone, you had to check the potion ID number in the top URL of the site, and then you were given a math problem to determine how many drops you needed to, apply to the bone. And some of these math problems were actually pretty difficult and complicated. Let's try to solve one ourselves, okay? You remove a large bone from the coffin and examine it. Some quick estimates tell you that it weighs 3,263 grams and has a volume of 2,330.71 cubic centimeters. How many drops of potion do you put on the bone? So first you would divide the mass by volume to get the density, then you square the density, and then you multiply it by 25, which gives us 49. See, Mom? Playing Neopets actually taught me really important math skills! As an aside, the person who eventually found the correct bone was actually called out by name on the page once they found it. This person kind of became a celebrity on the Neo boards for a while. I remember them talking about how their Neo mail inbox was always full. And after the correct bone was found, we had to make a potion. To make this potion, every user had a random assortment of ingredients, and these ingredients would do different things to the potions for each person. Namely, it would turn the potion a different color. No one user had the same combination, so the general strategy was that you had to keep a recorded list of what ingredient did what to your potion, and then you had to try and mix the colors in a specific order. The final potion had 10 different colors it had to go through to get the correct result. The next step involved even more math and spreadsheets, where you had to literally make a math spreadsheet about composites, and honestly, just reading these guide sites again confuses me, so I'm really not entirely sure how people managed to solve this back then. It was absurdly complicated and took a lot of trial and error to figure it out, but you see where I'm going with this, right? There are other notable Neopets plots like the Fairy's Ruin and the Return of Dr. Sloth, and they all had very different mechanics and puzzles, but one thing was always the same. Each puzzle was usually unique to the user and involved a lot of critical thinking, reasoning, and even math skills to figure them out. They were genuine, actual puzzles that you couldn't just enter an answer that someone already came up with. And while the more clever users would make calculators and strategies for other players to help them solve their own puzzle, it definitely wasn't as simple as just clicking a link. So now you kind of understand a little bit more about how Neopets plots used to be and the expectations everyone had going into this one. So what does the Void Within have to offer us? I always knew that I wanted to make a video on the Void Within. If it's not obvious, I was really invested in the Neopets plots, but I put off making this video for a really long time. I might have been immediately disillusioned by what the Void Within presented to me, but I was willing to wait and see what kind of interactive elements that they would roll out. I really wanted to give them the benefit of a doubt. It's been over 6 months now, and here's what we got. Every single day, you get to look through the laggy site and find 9 void items on the map to click. You do that, and you get 50 plot points. However, you don't have to do it yourself, because someone very helpfully posts all 3 links less than 5 minutes after the day changes over. Every 6 hours, you can put your pet in the hospital to help, which is simply a button to click and leave them to work in the hospital for a total of 200 points per day. It's important to note here that people got so obsessed over points that they were setting alarms to wake themselves up every 6 hours just so they could put their pet back in the hospital to try and obtain the maximum amount of points per day. And every single day, you can engage in very laggy and boring battles that consist of clicking 3 weapons and attacking the same enemies 20 times to get 200 more points. It should be noted again that they claimed the Battledome fights were going to be challenging even for Battledome vets, but even on hard, these fights are really laughably easy. Easier than most of the fights in the Battledome that currently exist, even though a lot of them are chained battles of multiple opponents one after another. There are also 2 games and 1 fetch quest that you can participate in every single day. These games are a buggy mess of a complete the circuit game that does not even remotely work on mobile. There is an achievement that was only available if you managed to complete this perfectly on the first day it was available, but I'll get back to that one. A literal game for preschool toddlers where you had to play I Spy with a variety of randomized items. There's a time limit which goes down if you click the wrong item. I guess that makes it challenging. And most recently released, a fetch quest that works in the exact same as every single other fetch quest on the site, where you have to bring an item to the character to receive a reward.
Wow.
And that's all. In 2 months, the Lost Desert plot and the Tale of Woe had a fully finished interactive story. It has been more than 6 months, and there has been absolutely 0 content, nothing promised, and everything has been a buggy mess and only optimized to draw daily traffic to the site with boring, mindless dailies, added on top of an already extremely long list of monotonous daily activities. And it should be noted that because they released the prize shop and the ranking trophies early, if you're a completionist, you're obligated to do each of these things every single day if you want the maximum rank and trophy. There is no thought put into any of these activities, and none of it even really correlates to the plot itself other than being busy work. For example, a complete the circuit puzzle was also used in the Return to Dr. Sloth plot. In this circuit puzzle, you're leading a Neopet, who is one of the main characters, through a maze as he infiltrates a space station full of bad guys. As you complete each puzzle, you get a little bit of dialogue from him that ties it into the plot. For the Void Within circuit puzzle, it's implied that you are helping one of the characters figure something out about the void, but you never feel like you're involved with the story, and the characters don't even say anything about it, no matter if you've played the game once or 10 times. They even had the audacity to highlight this random text in a book on one of the comic panels in a way that, were this any other Neopets plot, would certainly be a code to decipher that would point us towards some kind of hidden plot step or puzzle. And the people on the boards thought so too, and spent a long time trying to decipher this code. But it wasn't a code at all. It was just some nonsense to show that, yep, this book is spooky and mysterious and in a weird language that none of us can read. It was kind of insulting. And while I understand they're trying to make the plot, accessible to people who don't have the hours to spend on a virtual pet site every day, a lot of people have suggested that they merely make the plot steps monthly, with tasks and puzzles to complete per month or per week along the lines of what we're used to from plots, but with a little bit more time to complete them. Instead, the Void Within demands that you visit the site every single day and waste about 20 minutes on the same exact activity day after day, rather than a single, more complicated task that you could complete over the course of a week or a month. The fact that they didn't put in any effort at all to capitalize on the ARG point-and-click elements of their original plots is completely baffling to me. A lot of indie games get off the ground because of their engaging ARG puzzles, with entire Discords and hundreds of pages of Google documents dedicated just to trying to solve the mystery behind them. And that's without any point incentive. People just do this for fun. The Gravity Falls franchise was single-handedly revived from the grave because of the latest Book of Bill ARG, and that series ended 8 years ago. People have spent hours upon hours diving into the puzzles of this ARG just for the satisfaction of solving it, to the point where Disney has probably taken notice, and it might even result in more Gravity Falls content in the future. And just look at games like Poppy Playtime and FNAF, which exploded into popularity in part because of the ARGs hidden in the game trailers that channels like Game Theory immediately pounced on. Traditional marketing just doesn't work anymore. You have to be creative. And this was the perfect opportunity for Neopets to draw tons of eyes back to the site, new and old. I've seen a few of the excuses being made that Neopets is still a game for kids, so of course the games are going to be made for kids. But that was just as true back in 2005, and I've already gone over the extremely complex math skills that those puzzles required. Not to mention that the current Neopets team is well aware that Neopets is a nostalgia game, with a demographic of people mostly in their 20s and 30s still clinging to the site, don't at me. Just look at their recent Kickstarter campaign for a Neopets D&D game. It was pretty successful. The fact that they've stated that they're making this plot, slower so that people who work and have busy lives, like most adults do, would be able to participate means that they know this. Neopets knows at this point that it's a site mostly for adults. And another thing these indie horror games have proven is that time and time again, the best way to market an indie game is with an ARG. Neopets already had plenty of examples from previous plots that they could have used to come up with something new and unique, not only to draw back older players to check the site again, but to entice new players to look at the game. Instead, we got two lazy, buggy games for literal toddlers, a bunch of tedious daily activities, and a comic that puts out a single page every other day. But hey, maybe the comic is really well done. The comic is bad. First, I want to show you the content warning for The Void Within that they made sure every single player read before the plot began. We'd like to inform you that some of the themes The Void Within will explore include mental health, abandonment, identity, community, family, and exclusion/inclusion. Although some of these topics can be difficult to address, our team feels it crucial that our stories and characters come from real places and real people. This is how truly powerful stories latch on to each of us, why they linger with us. how they connect us. We've done our utmost to approach these themes thoughtfully and responsibly through a Neopean lens, while focusing on telling a captivating tale that everybody can relate to in some way. As we delve deeper into the void throughout the course of this plot, there may be some dark corners waiting around the winding path to come. And listen, I don't think it's bad to include trigger warnings for a story, the same way I don't think it's bad to address serious and quote-unquote real topics in stories. I actually think it's really important, because fiction is at its best when it can address dark topics without fear. They're right that this is how the best stories are told. And I don't even think this is necessarily out of place for Neopets either. Previous plots have been scary and dramatic and addressed a lot of emotional topics like abandonment and mental health and family. Trying to address these topics respectfully is fine. But I don't know if they accomplish that. I'm gonna go ahead and rip off a very important band-aid here. Some of the art for the plot and the comic is just downright goofy. I'm really trying not to go in too hard on the art style, because I know that Neopets has been working monetarily at a loss for a while, and I guess artists were unfortunately the last thing they wanted to invest in, even though the vast majority of their actual interactable story is in comic form and the site is mostly like an art-based website. But some of the panels are just so silly and difficult to take seriously. For a story they advertise with all these serious trigger warnings and this long, heartfelt message about how stories should be real and feel real, the silly and sometimes outright poorly drawn faces are really out of place. They should have done more than, allegedly, hiring a single storyboard artist and then, allegedly, outsourcing the rest of the actual art. Like, come on! Look at poor King Altador here! This page of the comic was so universally mocked and scorned by the entire site that they had to have it redrawn. Like, look at what he's supposed to look like! Look at how he's been drawn in the past! Any intense emotion shown on a character's face is just drawn in an absolutely ridiculous way that make the entire comic into an unintentional comedy with facial expressions that put Control-Alt-Delete to shame. Bruh. The Neopets art style historically hasn't been like amazing or like fantastic works of art, but previous plots have at least had a consistent style that you could take seriously. And I liked it. The characters portrayed emotions in ways that weren't goofy or out of place, and although previous plot comics were a lot shorter than this one, they were concise in their storytelling and didn't waste time with a bunch of padding and blank space. Which is another major issue with the comic. The pacing. They openly stated immediately that they were going to pace out the story to last 10 months, and even revealed at the start exactly how many chapters we were going to get. But I guess in their attempt to stretch out the story, they filled the comic with what feels like endless filler pages. There are so many pages of characters walking places, or moving to other areas, or arriving somewhere, in ways that could have been implicit. And then between these pages are extremely long dialogues between characters that sometimes haven't actually even shown up in the drawn comic pages yet. And don't get me wrong, these dialogues with the characters and the little portraits are nothing new to Neopets plots, but there usually isn't so much useless filler in between. With a medium like a comic, you have to be aware that every panel counts in how you tell your story, especially if you are slowly releasing a comic page every other day over a long period of time, as opposed to releasing entire chapters at once. If they were planning to make the comic such a main focal point, since there's really nothing else to do with the plot a majority of the time, they really should have put at least a little more effort into it. The comic right now is the only thing that gives players something new to see every other day, and sometimes the panels are like a single close-up of an eye with a tear from a character who just showed up 4 pages ago, so that we know that the flashback we're being shown was sad, and that we should feel sad. The characters also just aren't very compelling. Previous Neopets plots had characters that were flawed, but still fun, and they were decently written characters that had realistic interactions with each other. There were even a lot of romantic stories and broken families and tragic characters in previous Neopets plots, so nothing that's written in the trigger warning for The Void Within is anything new at all. But what is new is how poorly handled these topics are. The main villain of this comic appears to be the brother of one of the main characters, Neeks, an Aisha, which is a Neopet type, who disappeared mysteriously and made her brother so depressed that he turned gray, which is a Neopet's color, and is now turning the entire world gray because he's being manipulated by the evil guys who are just evil to be evil. Then there's Tavi, this poorly drawn Kiri, a Neopet, and a gray fairy named Balia. The gray fairy is important because she's also gray. Being gray is like a not so subtle allegory for depression. And so the main villain of the comic is depressed because his sister went missing for 20 years to go make deliveries in space and left him behind. Or so he thinks. In typical bad writing fashion, Neek starts trying to explain to Oz that she actually went through a magical portal that catapulted her 20 years into the future, but he cuts her off and says she'll never understand and blasts them all away before she can finish explaining. It's after this big dramatic moment that the characters are at their worst and tensions are high. So you're up for a rousing game of I Spy now, right? Or maybe you'd rather waste all of your hard-earned Neo points on an unbalanced fetch quest, so Tavi can make tea for everybody while she tells them a story about how she lost her leg to try and get everyone's spirits up, because if she can get over losing a leg, you can get over your depression, you stupid bit. In the end, it's clearly a comic written and storyboarded by either amateurs or people trying to put in the least amount of effort possible to pad out the story as much as possible. And I hate to say it because, again, I really did want to give them the benefit of a doubt, but everything points to this plot being extremely low effort and even kind of a cash grab. There are plot cookies that you can buy from the Real World Money Shop that gives you a ×2 bonus in plot points. This means that you can earn twice as much from the same activities that you were already doing every day. And with such high value items in the prize point shop, why wouldn't you want to buy them? Not only does it feel pay to win, but it makes it seem like they're focusing on how to make an experience they can optimize to make money, rather than trying to make an enjoyable and complete experience. Complete here meaning at the very least tested and free of bugs before it went live on the site. Everything I've described so far is what the plot is like if you can actually play through all the games and even read the comic without any issues. But unfortunately, it has been absolutely plagued with issue after issue, and that's kind of all people can talk about. For example, the Connect the Circuit game I mentioned previously as one of the few activities was completely broken for mobile on release. But there is an achievement for solving this perfectly the first time that the team claimed would be available when the game came back for the next chapter. And the next chapter came and went. No game. In fact, they had nothing at all to even say about this, until they announced a hiatus. While I was working on this video, the Neopets team seems to have actually listened to the community and realized that there's a serious problem with the way that they've rolled this plot out. They've put a pause on it to try and work on it based on the community feedback, promising that once episode 2 starts, they will have, quote, bug fixes, more difficult Battledome challenges, new Battledome and prize items, more games. Daily activities will be rebalanced to allow players to enjoy the plot at a more relaxed pace, and the plot pacing will be rearranged to improve story cadence. And I'll be honest, based on what we've received so far, I doubt they're going to try and work in any ARG elements or puzzles into it, though maybe that could have been what they meant when they said more games. I also don't like the way that they've said they're going to rebalance the daily activities, because a lot of the issue currently is the, quote, more relaxed pace that they tried to go for. The issue is that we do the same monotonous activities for maybe 20 minutes a day, and it's boring. There's nothing that requires thought or reasoning or any kind of challenge, because that would require thought to come up with, and the team in charge of this plot doesn't seem like they really think things through. Which might sound harsh, but if the old Neopets could make an engaging ARG and complex puzzles working with literally Web 1.0 technology, where you just kind of click between web pages and work math formulas into the site, then that proves that a little creativity really goes a long way. And to give them a little bit of credit, there is a small, side quest ARG type event that occurs alongside other major events, where a character named Orion shows up and tells players to go around finding a location based on a tiny sliver of an image. And you could argue that this is the ARG element of the plot, but clicking around the site to match an image to a location isn't the same as solving a multitude of complex puzzles. It also doesn't help that it's the same exact thing every single time. You're always just looking to match an image to a location on the site. And even sometimes, like during the most recent Fairy Festival event, everything just plays out kind of like a visual novel in front of the player, where you have very minimal input and don't even get like a lazy image hunt quest. You just kind of read what happened.
Wow.
Not to mention that the site has had a mystery pick contest for years with this exact same concept, so it's not like this is anything new either. And at this point, the stuff with Orion feels entirely disconnected from anything to do with the Void Within plot, including having its own separate trophy from the one that you get from the Void Within. There hasn't been any mention of him in the main story of the plot itself, despite both events seemingly occurring simultaneously in real time. At this point, I'm pretty sure it's just entirely its own separate mini-story about a guy possessed by a spirit that makes him rhyme or something.
Wow.
So, while this announcement of their attempt to restructure the plot is a step in the right direction, it's only a step, and I don't think they fully grasp what happened or what went wrong. So, I'm not sure if it'll be enough. I will fully admit it. I was nostalgia baited by the announcement of this plot. They started hyping it up months in advance, giving players a little taste of the plot with the advent calendar in 2023, which included some plot teases as well as introducing Orion as like a supposed key element of the story about to unfold. And I'm someone who checks in on Neopets a couple times a year, and I have ever since I started playing in 2000. So the hype got me fully locked in, to the point where I even started training my pet, even though I hate the Battle Dome. The point being, I went into this really wanting to like it. And I stuck to it for a while, doing all the daily activities, participating in the forum discussions, fighting in the Battle Dome, and convincing myself that they were just waiting to drop some kind of advanced puzzle step for us to solve. But after 3 months of the same tedious daily activities, the only thing I really feel is that I was let down. Which sure seems to be a common thing for me lately, doesn't it? I hope the new Neopets team can turn this around, but so far they haven't exactly inspired a lot of confidence in me with how they've handled most of their events and games. There's a lot regarding the monetization of the site that I just don't agree with. Like, Neopets has a premium monthly service that you can buy, and they recently started just handing out a gacha item that would give these premium members rare, expensive, and extremely sought-after items. I do understand that this is a business, and no one is going to run this site at a deficit. I just wish that they would focus less on trying to milk the remaining player base for all they're worth, and instead have used the Void Within as a way to market Neopets to a newer crowd. Because despite everything that I've said here, and a bit of general pessimism about the direction of the new team, I really want Neopets to continue as a site and to see success again. And a lot of the response to people who aren't satisfied with the plot is, if you don't like it, don't play. Which, yeah, is a response. But if even the old players who have been playing this site for years don't want to engage with the plot, how are you going to get any new players interested in it? Then not enough people use the site to make it worth the cost of upkeep, and it gets shut down. It feels like they're trying so hard to push this Neopets renaissance by playing on people's nostalgia, but they aren't willing to put in any actual effort to fix the site or release a site-wide event worth logging in for. They just kind of point to the site and go, hey, remember Neopets? We're still here. We've still got stuff going on. So I really hope that they've learned from the community feedback and can actually figure out what made people have such fond memories of previous Neopets plots in the first place. But I guess I'm pretty skeptical. I guess the true Void Within all along was in the Neopets team's creativity department.